Thank you for this opportunity to present and discuss the Vineyard project as laid out by Maria, and also what we're here to present and discuss today, the mitigation and compensation that Vineyard has taken on as part of the engagement with CRMC staff and the FAB over the last year. So maybe just a short word on Vineyard Wind. Vineyard Wind is a company focused on developing offshore wind farms here in New England. We are owned by two companies that have a big footprint in developing renewable projects across the U.S., onshore wind, utility scale photovoltaics, and also both groups have quite some experience in developing offshore wind globally and are now trying to bring that industry here to the U.S. Myself, I'm located in Boston and lead this group. I have experience from more than 10 offshore wind projects through operations, development, and construction from Europe, and previously been involved with this industry for the last 10 years. The objectives of Vineyard Wind is, as Maria says, we want to be part of the energy transition that is taking place along the eastern seaboard in response to state RFPs that demand more green energy. And while we do that, this particular industry also develops a new industry where jobs are being created and a new infrastructure is being created along the waterfronts of, in this case, southern New England, meaning southeast Massachusetts and Rhode Island, and states with infrastructure and competences in the offshore marine environment. We recognize that while we are new to this region, that we also have to coexist and grow alongside existing users of the ocean, not least the fishing industry, in this particular instance, the Rhode Island fishing industry. And Rhode Island has in many ways been a leader in showing the way how offshore wind can coexist with the fishing industry, not least through the ocean SAMP, that is actually the first regulatory body or the regulatory document in the US that describes how such two industries can live together. And we are here tonight to discuss our proposal and how we have changed our proposal in response to the process laid out in the ocean SAMP. So Vineyard Wind, as Maria said, we have laid out our project in a northeast-southwest direction, and once we were awarded a project last year, it became apparent that not least the Rhode Island fishing industry would have preferred that we had done a layout in a different direction, east-west, to facilitate or the existing agreements, gentlemen's agreements that had been in place with different industries. And since we started this process, we have spent a lot of hours internally ourselves trying to find ways how we could accommodate east-west to the best of our abilities within the restrictions we have in both the regulation and the permitting process that was going on, and the time we have to achieve federal tax credits that would allow us to deliver on the promise that we have entered into with the Massachusetts utilities in response to the Massachusetts RFP. And I think we have tried in many ways within the restrictions, could we create east-west lanes by moving turbines or dropping turbines, etc. And I think at the end of this road, we came to the conclusion that the best way to move forward for us was to mitigate to the extent possible, and for us that meant selecting the largest commercially available turbines. So instead of using the 106 positions, as Maria pointed out, we could go to 84 positions, meaning that we could reduce the area that was not aligned on an east-west orientation by 20%. And furthermore, we have also pledged in previous meetings that we would orient future projects along an east-west corridor. So since we were at the end of the opportunities for us to mitigate, I think we had to turn to compensation. We went through this before this body on November 27 to ask for a stay, and as Mr. Fugate had pointed out, we have entered into further stays to discuss what a compensation agreement could look like with the fishing industry and CRMC, the fishing industry represented by the FAB. So after the stay, we spent quite some time with Rhode Island DEM, trying to understand the available data, the best scientifically available data, how those data were compiled, how they could be amended for fisheries that were maybe not fully represented, and not least how you would use those data to estimate the economic impact of an offshore wind farm. And those discussions took place during most of December, and we then came back to the FAB with a compensation proposal right after the think it was the February 14th meeting, January 15th, we came with that proposal. And the proposal we came forward with was based on the data that was available to us, and we structured it in two funds. A direct compensation fund that would allow any fishermen that would have and could demonstrate a direct loss, being a year loss or being an economic loss, to claim that against the Vineyard Wind. It would be managed by Vineyard Wind and would pay out such compensations. On top of that, I think the discussions have learned that as a first project, we have a special responsibility to find a way forward. The Ocean SAMP is a unique document and a structure regulating this. So as the first project, we would offer a 23.8 million fund that would go to explore opportunities to increase the ability to fishing industry to coexist and fish within offshore wind farms. It could be through research in gear, it could be through research in navigational methods or other methods that will basically allow to harvest as much as the economic potential that would exist within a wind farm that would be possible. We then entered into a very intense period of discussion with the FAB and CRMC, whether this was the right proposal, whether the funds were the right amount. And I think at the end of that discussion, it was very clear from the FAB and from the CRMC that instead of having payments, the 30 million that we proposed spread over 30 years, that it was much preferred to have more money up front, so that as the wind farm got built and we entered into the operations phase, that the money could be deployed in the beginning and not waiting for the full 30-year period. So in response to that, we changed the proposal so that there's a direct compensation fund for 4.2 million that would be seed funded with a $1 million funding, so that there would be sufficient money available for the compensation. And instead we changed the Future Fisheries, Rhode Island Future Fisheries Viability Fund, as it's called now, into a payment where we pay $2.5 million each of the first 5 years. All of these payments are due 60 days after we reach financial close. Financial close meaning that the money for the project is available and construction will actually happen. We expect that to happen at the end of this year. And then we would pay the money into the fund. The fund also is changed in the purpose. Since we originally proposed it, we had maybe a more sort of science and research-related focus. The fishermen have expressed a strong interest that they themselves best know how to spend the money to further the objectives of maximizing the possibility for offshore wind and fishing to coexist. We have agreed to that. We think it is a good way of making the fishing industry responsible, and we have basically said that besides providing the money, besides providing funds for setting up the trust and providing training and funding for training of board members, that we would leave that to the fishing industry through the FAB, guided by CRMC, to set up a structure that would benefit the fishermen in the best way that they see fit. We think this is a very good proposal. It has been a long process. It has been a very intense process. It's also been a process where emotions have been high from time to time. I think it is a good result that we have come to. We are happy that the FAB has agreed to it. And I would maybe finish off with recognizing that I think there's been an immense amount of effort and time spent on this process from CRMC staff and also from the FAB, many of them deciding not to go fishing and basically prioritizing this process instead of putting their time and attention to their businesses. So we would like to acknowledge and thank you for spending that time. So in all, we feel that this is a good proposal. We feel that this is the right proposal for an offshore wind farm of our size and being the first in the country. And we would be happy to take any questions. So with that, I would like to conclude my remarks. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Pedersen. Council members, do you have any questions for Mr. Pedersen and Mr. Gomez?
Yes, I know I've got the numbers in here somewhere. So what was the bottom line?
So the two funds in total are 16.7 million.
16.7. When I looked at this, and we've had a number of meetings, and it's been a process, I kind of worry about the onshore support, and I see nothing in the proposal that will support the loss of jobs in the fishing industry, especially if we lose the squid industry. There's a lot of support, people onshore, operating plants, transportation of product, those types of things that are going to suffer. I mean, and so in the big picture, from where I come from, Rhode Island ends up on a negative side of this. I think we lose as opposed to even staying neutral. I am in favor of wind farms. I believe in climate change, and I believe that carbon's the primary cause at this point for that. So we need to be able to work to get those. But the SAMP was created a number of years ago as a major zoning document for offshore, so that each party, including whales and submarines and cable lays and a whole bunch of things, it was a big zoning document so that compromise would be available. Now we're down to mitigation as being dollars as opposed to a compromise that allows the fishermen to continue fishing. I'm not sure that's in the spirit of coexistence, but I understand where you're coming from, and at this point in time, and the financial aspects of this, and the funding outlines and things. But would you comment on what happens to the loss of jobs in our fishing industry, the onshore support people, the people that sell diesel fuel, the people that process the product, the people that truck it?
Thank you very much for the question. It's a difficult topic, of course. I think, first of all, I would say we think and we hope and we believe that fishing will continue. We recognize that it's going to be and has to be done in a different way, potentially, or maybe a slightly reduced way to what was possible before, but we are still firm believers that fishing can happen in and between these wind farms, and we think it's very important that we find ways to make that possible to the extent that it can be done. I mean, we are going to be long-term neighbors with the fishing industry. We have no intent of not being good neighbors and not being part of growing here. We're not trying to push one industry out to the benefit of us. And we think this fund actually addresses those questions by making more money available upfront for whatever initiatives would be needed to ensure that the maximum value can be harvested and continue to be fished, also to the benefit of the shore side of things. And if not, there is a separate fund where losses can be claimed, including for anyone who has a justifiable claim, including shore side.
Would you comment on the DEM analysis that came up with $35 million as opposed to the 16 million that you've arrived at?
Yeah, I think the DEM study, and I should probably not speak to it. I assume someone from DEM is present here, but basically that was
on the board.
Yeah. So it was also actually a number over 30 years. So I think we talked with the FAB about short versus long money, and of course it's more expensive to it takes time for us to make or earn the money. So if you want to have it up front, there's less money, which basically carries the same value. And I think we had the discussions back and forth with the FAB, and we ended up at this number as the compromise.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Are there any further questions from Mr. Pedersen? I just have a question on the fund. It's not restricted, is it? In what it can be used for?
No, we would put no restrictions on it. We don't pretend to believe the best use of the money. We have no restrictions on the money.
Okay. And have you discussed different ways that it could be used, examples, just for the benefit of the audience, just so they have some concrete examples? Yeah,
I think, honestly, I think it's better asked by the fishing community, the FAB and some of the members. We have heard safety concerns being raised at several FAB meetings. I have an experience from wind farms in Europe where we have seen that fishing can coexist to a certain degree, and safety can be improved if maybe equipment needs to be procured. I think every part of the world is different. Maybe for this part of the world there needs to be more research in gear, how can you fish in between the turbines and so on. But I think the fishing industry has a better view of what would be done. I think as a developer, we are maybe not the right ones to set the tone. And I think actually that was one of the very good outcomes of this, that we actually agreed that instead of having sort of a broad research-based approach, science, it's basically up to the fishing industry how they can put it best to use now.
So it's to their discretion?
It's to their discretion, yes.
Thank you.